morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this fifth day of January. Well, it is a bit of a cloudy day today with a bit of rain yesterday, last night. Were you affected by that at all? Well, right now, ladies and gentlemen, what do we have for you today? Today, we're looking at some of the news, and then we'll have, probably from next week, we'll resume our functions and events happening as well. First of all, let's take a look at the Aussie satellite hitch ride in SpaceX rocket. Rocket science this is.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
The first SpaceX launch of 2023 ushers in a new era for global air traffic control. Launched on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral in Florida early this morning, the 5 satellites were made by Canberra-based space services company Skycraft.
And making its way to orbit.
Weighing in at 300 kilograms, it's the biggest ever Australian-made payload sent into space, and just the first of 200 satellites to be launched over the next 2 years.
Stage separation confirmed.
They'll allow Australia to provide global coverage for air traffic management for the very first time.
It means that a plane in the middle of the Pacific Ocean will now get the same air traffic management service that it would get if it was close to a major airport. And this is good for air safety, it's good for passenger comfort, and it's good for reducing the environmental impact of air travel.
Just as if you're driving around, you don't get mobile phone reception if there's no tower there, it's the same in space. You don't get reception if there's no satellite above. So by building this network, it's aiming to solve not just an Australian problem, but in 2 years' time, a global problem.
The satellites could also make global air travel safer and smoother, allowing travellers to spend less time suffering turbulence, getting pilots clearance to change altitude to smooth air more quickly.
Skycraft separation confirmed.
The machines were created from components manufactured across regional Australia, including Queanbeyan and Newcastle in New South Wales and Wodonga in Victoria.
What today's launch shows is that in Australia we can do space well, and we can do big things in space.
The satellites will undergo a 3-month testing process before they can be used by Air Services Australia. Chantal Alcouri, ABC News, Canberra.
And the sky is the limit, as they say, and that's wonderful news, that our own Aussie made and right out there in the space, providing that wonderful. And he explained it quite well, like if you don't have mobile coverage, and you don't have the signals, you can't communicate. So in the case with the aircrafts, if you don't have those satellites to fall back on, and that the signals are not there. So that's wonderful. Well, right now, buskers at the 2023 Park Always Festival. Here's a look. The budding young stars there as well, and the lookalikes there, the whole lot. That's the The king lives on, as they reckon. Well, right now there have been calls for reforming of our health systems.
So pre-COVID, the health system, the hospitals, the primary care system was under stress. COVID made it even worse. And COVID is not over. People are still getting infected. People are still going to hospitals. Hospital staff are taking time off because they're sick and so on. So the health system now is under greater stress than I think I've seen it in my entire career.
And so what do you make of these renewed calls that we've seen in the last couple of days from the premiers of both Victoria, where you are, and New South Wales, saying that reform to Medicare with a particular focus on bulk billing needs to be the priority for this year?
Obviously, primary care is under enormous stress. Rates of bulk billing are starting to decline. They hit a peak of about 88% at the start of last year. They're down to about 85-ish, 84-ish now. So it's really, people are finding it harder to get a bulk billing GP. We need to actually address the primary care system, which is not just about doctors and primary care, but it's also about multidisciplinary teams to make sure that people with chronic illness can get the care that they need. We're using doctors for what only doctors can do. But it's not only primary care. If you look at hospital emergency departments, they're in deep trouble as well. And the primary care system, fixing up primary care will help, but it won't entirely fix the problem. It's a much wider problem. The states and the Commonwealth both have to step up and try and do things better in 2023 than at the end of 2022.
Dr. Duckett, I want to come back to what that stepping up from all levels of government could and would look like. But first, on that point that you just made, that the rates of bulk billing are continuing to decline, why is that?
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, there was a long freeze in rebates over the period of the Liberal government, which has been, the freeze has been lifted now. But that meant that the rebates were not going up in line with average weekly earnings. They were going up in line with the Consumer Price Index, but obviously a general practice has to employ nurses and so on. And so they were falling behind the sort of cost structures of general practice. Now, how you deal with that is very complex, because the last time rebates went up a lot, doctors worked less hours. And so you didn't get the return as that what you thought you were going to get. So the design of what you need to do is quite complex. It's not a simple problem. It's not a simple fix.
So this doesn't simply come down to increase that rate of bulk billing and you solve the problem. There are multiple levers, it sounds like you're saying, need to be worked in at the same time.
Absolutely. As I said, you've got multiple problems happening at the same time. You've got the shift of the epidemiology in the population to more complex illnesses, more chronic illnesses, multiple chronic illnesses. You've got the financial pressures, and you can't actually fix one without the other, and so it is a complex issue. It's not going to be fixed in one quick decision, and it's not going to be fixed by budget night, for example.
And you mentioned a moment ago that there needs to be work done by state and territories as well as the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth clearly has the impact on Medicare and on some of those levers for bulk billing. What should the state and territories be doing?
Well, I think there's again, it's not a simple problem. You've had underinvestment in the hospital system for a very long period of time. You've often got poor management, which is alienating the staff. They don't feel valued. And the staff are taking sick leave because they've got COVID. The staff feel resentful that the governments are not treating seriously the issue of COVID. So there's a whole complex of problems that states who stepped up really, really well during 2020 and 21, the pre-vaccination period of COVID, and yet they've dropped the ball now, and infections and hospitalisations going up. So it's a complex set of things that have to be done. And the states obviously want to deflect the attention, say it's all the Commonwealth's problem, when it's not. It's shared, and they need to be looking after the things that they're responsible for themselves.
Well, there you are. So it's a shared responsibility, and it is something that needs to be shared around the state, local and federal government to handle that. And the problem is not going to go overnight, and not even just one budget night or something like that. So it is a complex issue which needs to be addressed step by step and slowly. Well, right now, firefighters, they not only always be fighting fires, but they also come out to animal rescue, as per this report.
Just pulling over again.
So there you are. That's a humanitarian thing, but of course you're looking at the poor cars being rescued by the firefighters there, all in the call of duty in a day's work. All right, the Northern Territory is cleaning up after the floods. Let's take a look.
The torrents of floodwater have subsided and the sun is shining on Timber Creek. A flash flood days before Christmas, in the wake of ex-tropical cyclone Ellie, has left businesses and residents counting their losses.
It's left a real mess, so we're still trying to work out how to keep operating.
After days of cleaning mud and debris, 14 rooms at the Timber Creek Hotel are likely to be unusable for months.
The water torrent coming in the entrance of the caravan park was extremely strong. It was picking mahogany trees up, went through the swimming pool. It was just carrying everything.
Hundreds of kilometres from any major centre, with cars flooded, rebuilding is next to impossible for some. But donations have been flowing through.
Transport, no buses, to jump in or go to town to, replace all your belongings that you lost.
A town caught off guard and left to its own devices. The outstations of Myatt and 1 Mile faring the worst.
I had to swim in and rescue 5 kids. It was all in a rush. We had to do it in a rush. Trying to get the kids out of the community into high ground.
It was here at the local basketball court where more than 30 people were evacuated from the outstations of Myatt and 1 Mile. In a major community effort that continues today, dozens of meals were cooked and blankets were sourced. And while it may take many of the families months to get their homes back in order, concern has now turned to how prepared Timber Creek is for future emergencies. Residents want better disaster planning and a quicker government response in the future.
Don't wait for another 12 months for another flood to come. Start planning now.
The NT Government's Chief Minister, Natasha Fyles, says there were difficulties in reaching Timber Creek during the flood because of the weather. But a huge effort to get the community back on its feet was now underway. Roxanne Fitzgerald, ABC News, Timber Creek.
And reporter Roxanne Fitzgerald joins us now. Roxy, most major territory highways were cut off over Christmas, but they've now reopened. Is that helping to get more aid through to people?
Hi, Eleni. Well, if you'd driven through Timber Creek today, you probably wouldn't have even realised that a flood had been through this town just days ago. A major clean-up effort is definitely underway. People have started chucking out the items that were completely sodden. The Timber Creek Hotel is back on, it's back open, even though a bunch of their rooms were damaged. The shop floor and the bar were completely covered in mud and debris. Where I'm standing right here, water was at least a metre high. It was definitely a very chaotic situation on December 23rd, but it's been a whole community effort getting the town to where it is right now. Everyone getting in and pitching in with help. So yes, having the roads open is definitely getting more aid through. Today we had the Red Cross providing humanitarian support. They put on a free lunch and activities for the kids, and there was a donation spot where people could pick up essential items. The Northern Territory Government today started handing out flood relief payments. We saw dozens of people lining up at the local shop getting these payments where they could buy food and essential items. And tomorrow they'll be able to line up so that they can get payments for to replace their white goods and fridges, which were destroyed in the flood. Now that's under the federal government's flood relief recovery fund, which is being facilitated by the Northern Territory Government. We've also seen a massive donation drive by the Northern Land Council that's seen dozens of items of bedding and clothes and reading glasses, real essential items, which is really important in this town where a lot of homes were severely overcrowded. A lot of people were living in pretty dire situations before this event, and getting back on track would have been really, really tough. So it's going to be a couple of months before Timber Creek is back on track, but that effort is definitely underway. Thanks, Lenny.
Thank you, Roxanne.
Wonderful to see that the recovery efforts happening there at Timber Creek. As Roxanne mentioned, that if you drove through there today, you would not even realize that it had been a big flood there. Well, young people are coming out and filling in those labour shortages, especially in the farming area.
Mum found it on Facebook. It just sounded like a good job, get out a bit. I started about a week ago, so we just sort the mangoes and then pack them away so they get sent off.
Well, there's probably about 4,000 KPs or Bowens. People think they're two different fruits, but they're not. They're the same variety. And there's about 1,000 R2s down there. We're pretty happy with the fruit. The weather's been beautiful for us. We had 60 mils about a month before picking, which has helped with fruit fill, and we've basically had nothing since. And it hasn't been hot or anything like that, so it's been fantastic picking conditions.
Very good conditions there, and of course the much needed labour force is available. Well, right now prayers is what's being called for the victims of that SeaWorld crash.
Special notes for a special friend who lost his life doing what he loved.
Ashley's irreplaceable. There's nobody on the planet that's going to fill his shoes.
Ashley Jenkinson was at the controls of the helicopter that crashed into a sandbar on Main Beach after it collided with a second chopper which was coming into land. His emotional friends struggling to comprehend what went wrong.
I mean, everybody's asking themselves, how could something like that happen?
While Sydney father Simon Tadros grieves his lost wife Vanessa, he asked for prayers that his son Nicholas would recover from his critical injuries. The family's Sydney neighbours remembered her fondly.
He's just happy to give and always smiling, very loving mother and very loving wife.
A similar sense of loss on the other side of the world. British nationals 57-year-old Diane and 65-year-old Ronald Hughes had been excited for their Australian adventure.
I was just talking to him the day before he's leaving and he's looking forward to his holiday.
Yes, it is appalling. The more you hear about it, the worse it seems.
Of those involved, 6 remain in hospital. The condition of Geelong mum Winnie De Silva has improved, but her 9-year-old son Leon is still fighting for life. 3 patients, including Michael James, the pilot from the second helicopter, are in a stable condition at Robina Hospital. Despite the horrific accident, the Gold Coast has still been busy, families enjoying the holidays undeterred. Crowds of people are also making the most of the Broadwater, a popular recreational spot which was the scene of Monday's tragedy. Today it's full of locals, visitors and plenty of tourist activities. For one local company, Scenic Tours were back.
It's a bit upsetting. Well, I guess everybody's got to resume business.
SeaWorld Helicopters has grounded their tourist flights and are issuing refunds to those already booked. They're not commenting further on the crash while the air safety investigation is underway. Talissa Siganto, ABC News.
And what a tragic news, and it must be hard for people to get back onto that same, if you are a helicopter pilot or an operator in that area, it will always be in your mind, taking off and coming in and landing. It must be really, really hard. Well, right now, Kevin McCarthy loses his 6th U.S. House Speaker for the vote.
So essentially what's happening is when there's a new Congress that begins in the United States, begins on January 3rd, and the first order of business in the House is to elect the Speaker. The Speaker is a constitutionally mandated role. It's the person who is essentially has leadership over the entire House, and also requires that you have a majority of votes of the people present. So it's not just the case that if you get more votes than your opponent that you can be elected. You have to have a majority of all of the people who are there, the members elect. And nothing can happen in the House until the Speaker is chosen. No one can be sworn in. There can be no legislation. So it's the first order of business. It's very important. And the challenge now is that the Republican majority is so narrow that Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader, can't afford many defections from supporting him as Speaker of the House without actually not being able to get enough votes. And so that's what's happened now on the 6th vote, 3 yesterday and 3 today. Kevin McCarthy has been unable to get the majority votes he needs in order to be elected Speaker. Scott.
Only in America. Well, there you go. He really needs to have the Speaker in the House in place before any other business can resume. Well, right now, they always talk about El Nino or El Nina. Do you understand what they mean? What's happening now? So, potentially right now, El Nino event is developing as El Nina is being passing away.
We're in the final stages of the current La Nina event, and it is on its way out. It's weakening quite rapidly now, and by April, May, it will be over. These events are always over around April or May, so although we've had 3 in a row, each one of them has died off around April, and then in the last couple of years, it's come back again. Now, the current outlook for the rest of this year is that there is a potential for an El Nino event to develop once we get to about June of 2023.
And run us through what the conditions will be and what sort of impact that will have.
Well, if we do get an El Nino event coming up after this La Nina, and there's no guarantee of that, okay, so it's about a sort of 65% chance at the minute that we're looking at an El Nino event. The conditions could go back to neutral. That's another thing which a lot of people don't realise, that conditions in the Pacific don't have to be El Nino or La Nina, they can just be neutral, nothing going on. But if we do get El Nino, then we're looking at warmer than average sea surface temperatures over towards the central and eastern Pacific, towards South America, and cooler than normal waters around the north and east coast of Australia. That in turn means that there's less evaporation off the ocean around Australia, and that means that there's less moisture feeding into our rainfall producing weather systems. Those weather systems can be disrupted a bit as well, and that means less rain over eastern Australia at least, and northern Australia during an El Nino event. And that's something that we've become very familiar with over the decades.
Oh, Professor, you mentioned there that there's about a 65% chance of that El Nino effect. You've been looking at the data very closely. What's your assessment? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I actually think there is a very tiny chance, and it's only very, very small, I couldn't put a percentage on it, but it's minute, that we could get another La Nina. We have no record of 4 La Ninas in a row. There are records in the past of 3, but our records only go back to 1876 with direct measurements in places where we can tell what's going on. So that's, although it seems like a long time ago, it's not actually really long in terms of how the climate system works. So it would be highly unusual, in fact it would be unprecedented as far as we know, to have 4 La Ninas in a row, but I think we shouldn't completely discount it. I think neutral is a possibility, but again I think that possibility is less than the possibility of an El Nino, sorry. So why do I think that? It's because what the El Nino and La Nina events do for the Pacific Ocean and atmosphere is they allow a sort of release valve for excess heat that builds up in the ocean atmosphere system. And with a La Nina, and we've now had 3 in a row, a large part of the Pacific is cooler than average, and then just over towards Australia it's warmer. With an El Nino, you get a large part of the tropical Pacific being warmer than usual, and that's your release valve for getting rid of some of that extra heat between the ocean and the atmosphere. And I think we're now sort of really primed to have that release valve let off, so that that heat can be sort of recycled through the ocean atmosphere system. So my gut feel would be the possibility of an El Nino. But we also have to remember that El Nino isn't just a one-size-fits-all. It can be weak, moderate or strong, and then the impacts of a weak, moderate or strong El Nino can vary on Australia. So as an example of that, 1997-98 there was a really strong El Nino event. We expected severe drought in Australia. It didn't happen. We had above average rainfall across eastern Australia. 2002-2003, moderate El Nino event in the Pacific, didn't look as if it would really do very much. Severe drought in eastern Australia. So those are sort of exceptional years. More often than not, it's closer to what you would expect. But what I'm trying to explain is that really there's a whole lot of variables in here. It's not only El Nino and La Nina, it's also what happens in the Indian Ocean and in the Southern Ocean around Australia that can also have an impact. If we do get El Nino though, bigger chances of below average rainfall and drought.
Well, I think you've done a very good job of explaining all the different variances there. Professor, I guess that makes some of the incredible challenge, doesn't it, of giving advice around preparation and what to do with so many variants. When do you expect to have a more settled view of what will be happening towards the end of this year and into 2024?
Well, we expect to know by June of this year what's likely to develop in the Pacific. There have been some historical instances of an apparent beginning of an El Nino event that then sort of collapsed and didn't come to anything, but that's very rare. And so by about June, we should be pretty certain whether we're getting El Nino or not. and that then gives us the months through winter and into spring in Australia, and even early summer, to be managing the consequences if it is indeed an El Nino event. And some of those consequences could include the below average rainfall, and that goes together with above average temperatures. And when you've got that combination, drier conditions, higher temperatures in spring and summer, then we're looking at potential really quite serious bushfire risk. And of course we're coming out of a period where we've had 3 years of above average rainfall. There's a lot of fuel out there, and it doesn't take very long with no rain and high temperatures for that fuel load to dry out. And once it's cured, it just takes a spark to start a fire. And that's something that I think we're going to have to be extremely mindful of as we go through this year.
Wow, what a great in-depth and study. So I hope so now you understand the two different effects, and I couldn't even pronounce them very properly. So that the El Nino and El Nino. So the two different effects, and they have been explained quite thoroughly by the professor there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for you today. It's wonderful to have your company, and probably by next week we will resume the regular services and have our daily India report coming in, and of course the weekly real estate update. The migration, because I've heard that migration update probably more towards the end of the month, but we also are getting ready to go to press as well. So that's a lot happening. That's already started, so we're getting the wheels in the motion and getting everything ready for this year, the 2023. Well, once again, wonderful to have your company this morning. We'll see you again tomorrow.